I'm Eliza Matthews, 32 years old. Despite building a successful career in finance, it was never good enough for my father. The annual family reunion dinner is fast approaching, and I'm more nervous than usual. This year, I bought him a luxury car as a gesture of peace, hoping everything would be different. I didn't know that inside my bag was a document that would change everything. By the end of the night, I finally understood why my father never loved me. Before I share my story, tell me where you're watching this, and hit the like and subscribe buttons if you've ever dared to face someone who refused to see your worth. Believe me, my story might give you the courage you need. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Boston, my family seemed perfect to outsiders. But behind closed doors, everything was different. My father, Richard Matthews, built a real estate development company from humble beginnings into a multi-million-dollar corporation. He valued success, status, and respect above everything else, including family relationships. From my earliest memories, he wasn't the type of father who attended school plays or helped with homework. Instead, he was a harsh critic who pointed out that my B+ should have been an A, questioned why I wasn't chosen as team captain, and reminded me that second place was just the first loser. My mother, Caroline, was the opposite of my father in many ways. She was warm and loving when my father wasn't around, but she became a different person in his presence, almost shrinking into herself, never challenging him, never defending us kids when his criticism went too far. I didn't fully understand this dynamic until I was much older. The strange power she had over him, the way her eyes would glance at him before answering even a simple question about dinner plans or weekend activities. My siblings and I grew up in a complicated family structure. My older brother, James, 3 years my senior, was the undisputed favorite. He played football, made the honor roll, dated girls from the right families, and eventually followed in our father's footsteps into the real estate business after graduating from his alma mater. Everything seemed easy for James, or at least it seemed that way to me. He seemed to intuitively understand what would please our father, while I was always guessing wrong. My younger sister, Sophia, who is 2 years younger than me, somehow managed to navigate our father's approval system better than I did. She wasn't as high-achieving as James, but she had a natural charm and an almost supernatural ability to read the room, knowing when to speak up and when to step back into the background. She became the family mediator, the one who could sometimes make Dad laugh when he was in a dark mood, the one who would come into my room after a brutal critique session to reassure me that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But for me it was never enough. I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class, earned a full academic scholarship to Cornell, while my father pushed me to attend his alma mater, seeing my choice as a rejection of his legacy. During college, I worked 2 part-time jobs while maintaining my GPA. Yet during breaks, he questioned why I wasn't interning at a more prestigious company. After graduation, I turned down a half-hearted offer to work at his company, because I knew I would never be seen as anything more than a pity hire. Instead, I moved to New York City with only 2 suitcases and determination, sleeping on friends' couches while applying to every financial firm I could find. When I finally landed an entry-level position at Goldman Sachs, the response was, "Let's see if you can last a month." I didn't just last a month, I stayed for 8 years, advancing without family connections or nepotism, driven partly by passion but also by the urgent need to prove him wrong. Just last month, I received a major promotion to senior investment strategist, becoming the youngest person in the company's history to hold that position. The significant pay raise allowed me to finally buy my dream apartment in Manhattan and still have savings left over. With those savings, I made what I considered a big gesture, buying my father a Mercedes S-Class for Father's Day. In my fantasy, this gift would finally make him see me as a successful person worthy of his approval. The car cost nearly a year's salary, but I convinced myself it would be worth it to finally hear him say he was proud of me. Looking back now, I can see how sad that need for recognition was, how it shaped every major decision in my life. My achievements weren't for myself, but weapons in a war I couldn't win to earn his love. When I bought that car, I was just buying a luxury vehicle. I was trying to buy what every child deserves for free: unconditional love from their parents. The Matthews family gathering always fell on the last weekend of June, which happened to be close to Father's Day, so the gathering also served as a celebration of Richard Matthews' patriarchal status. This year would be no different, except that I had decided to finally stand out by purchasing that extremely expensive luxury car. An elegant black Mercedes S-Class, with all the premium features my father had mentioned while admiring his friend's car at the golf club. As the date of the gathering drew nearer, my anxiety skyrocketed to a new level. I spent 3 weekends searching for the perfect outfit, something that looked successful but not too try-hard. The S-Class with all the premium features my father had mentioned while admiring his friend's car at the golf club. As the date of the meeting approached, my anxiety rose to new heights. I spent 3 weekends searching for the perfect outfit, something that looked successful but not over the top, feminine but not tacky. A contradictory mix that seemed like what my dad expected from a woman in the business world. I finally chose a navy blue dress custom made by a designer my mom said my dad respected, with delicate gold jewelry and expensive but understated shoes. The familiar pattern of preparation felt sad even as I did it. The desperate routine of a child still seeking approval at 32 flashed through my mind as I packed each item, each marked with the shape of my father's disappointment when I was 16 and won the state math competition. Him questioning why I focus more on debate because people who are good with numbers are easy to find. When I graduated college with summa cum laude honors, his only comment was that the field I chose was unstable compared to real fields like inheritance. My first bonus at Goldman made him wonder if finance was just gambling in fancy clothes, and my first promotion sparked questions about whether I was chosen to fill a gender quota. Nothing was ever seen as an achievement in its own right, always tainted by his skepticism. However, this year brought additional complications, something that shook the foundation of my identity just 3 months earlier. A popular genetic testing service I used out of curiosity about my origins revealed something unexpected. Genetic markers did not align with my status as Richard Matthews' biological child. After initial shock and disbelief, I quietly pursued more definitive testing, obtaining a DNA sample from my father's hairbrush during a brief visit home. The results were definitive and now sit in a sealed envelope in my bag, the last option I have yet to decide whether to use. This discovery explains so much. The lifelong feeling of being an outsider in my own family, the subtle physical differences that no one noticed, and the inexplicable coldness of a man who at least showed basic respect. This discovery explains so much. A lifetime of feeling like an outsider in my own family, subtle physical differences that no one else noticed, and the indescribable coldness of a man who at least showed basic affection to his other children. I suspect he knew, and that knowledge colored every interaction we ever had. The day before the reunion, I drove my new Mercedes to my parents' house in the Boston suburbs, after arranging for delivery to the nearest dealership. I planned the presentation carefully, arriving in the afternoon when my mother would be at her garden club meeting, ensuring a private moment for this peace offering. My father opened the door looking his usual self, neat and professional. I handed him the sealed envelope containing the Boston suburb house after arranging for delivery to the nearest dealership. I had planned the presentation carefully, arriving in the middle of the afternoon while my mother was at her garden club, ensuring a private moment for this peaceful offer. My father opened the door in his usual neat, casual business attire, though it was Saturday, looking slightly annoyed by the interruption. "Eliza, you're here too early. The reunion is tomorrow," he said, glancing at his watch as if I were late for an appointment. "I know, Dad. I actually brought your Father's Day gift early and wanted to give it to you personally," I explained, my heart racing as I handed him the small box containing the car keys with the Mercedes emblem clearly visible. He opened it with a polite, distant manner, he usually reserved for obligatory gifts. His expression turned to surprise as he recognized the logo. "This is?" he asked, and I guided him to the front window where the shiny new car was parked in the driveway. His face showed genuine surprise, followed by something almost like joy, but it quickly faded into his usual analytical expression. "This is excessive, Eliza. What are you trying to prove?" he asked, though he was already moving toward the front door with the keys in his hand. "It's okay," I lied. "I got a big promotion and wanted to do something special for you." He circled the car twice, inspecting it like he was checking out a real estate investment, noting features and asking pointed questions about financing and insurance that felt more like an interrogation than a thank you. After a brief test drive, he commented that the steering felt a little loose, even though the car was known for its good handling. He parked it in the garage instead of leaving it in the driveway where guests might see it. His thanks were brief and formal, followed immediately by a comment that I must be lucky to be able to throw money away like this, effectively crushing the grand gesture I had planned. That night, I called my best friend Taylor from my hotel room, holding back tears as I recounted the cold reception. "You know what? Forget about him," Taylor said with the righteous anger of a friend who'd heard this story too many times. "Give him the car back, he doesn't deserve it." I refused, still clinging to the hope that tomorrow would be different, that in front of other people he might show some appreciation, might finally see me. "Promise me you won't show him the test," Taylor warned before hanging up. "Unless you're ready for a nuclear explosion." I promised, but the envelope stayed in my wallet, a secret weapon I feared and couldn't let go of. Sunday afternoon arrived perfectly. The June weather was sunny with a gentle breeze, as if the environment itself was conspiring to create the illusion of a perfect family gathering. I took the long route to my parents' house, using the drive to practice confident answers to the inevitable questions about my personal life, my career, and the absence of a husband or children at the ripe age of 32. My fingers turned white on the steering wheel as I entered the driveway lined with maple trees, already half filled with the luxury cars of my father's extended family and business associates. People who, for some reason, always managed to make it onto the guest list for what was supposed to be an intimate family gathering. I spotted the Mercedes I had given him parked conspicuously near the front entrance, not in the garage like yesterday. Its strategic position made it impossible for arriving guests to miss it. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, checked my makeup one last time, then walked toward the grand front door with the confidence I had mustered in the boardroom filled with men who had looked down on me. My mother opened the door, her face glowing with genuine warmth as she hugged me, whispering, "You're so beautiful, dear," before adding the standard line, "Your father is in the backyard with the Petersons." Like a weather warning, the large foyer was already bustling with relatives, a usual mix of actual family and my father's carefully curated collection of connections, treated as honorary members of the Matthews clan. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, approached with air kisses and a barrage of questions about my love life, while Uncle George offered a warm handshake and a shout, "Here's our Wall Street genius," which I knew would annoy my father if he heard it. Cousins, second cousins, and family friends moved in predictable patterns, repeating the same conversations every year with minor updates, everyone playing their roles in the Matthews family theater. My father's arrival was exactly as I expected, walking in from the garden with 3 business associates, all laughing at something that was probably only slightly funny but considered funny because of the speaker's wealth. His eyes scanned the room, nodding and greeting the other guests until they landed on me. A flash of recognition was followed by a slight tension on his lips before he nodded exactly as he did to distant relatives, then walked over to my mother to whisper something in her ear. There was no special greeting for me, the middle child, the daughter who had just given him a car worth more than most people's annual salary. I pretended not to notice, busy chatting with my cousin Rachel about her medical residency program. However, the familiar pain of rejection still burned in my heart. My mother suddenly appeared beside me, touching my arm gently. "Honey, your father said you brought him a new car. How generous of you," she said, her eyes conveying a mix of gratitude and concern about the extravagance. "Please come and say hello to the Stevensons. They just returned from a financial conference in Singapore and would like to hear your opinion." That was how my mother always acted, creating social barriers, making excuses for interactions that should have happened naturally between family members. James arrived late as usual, entering with his perfect wife, Rebecca, and their 2 perfect children. He received a warm hug from my father, whom I had tried to win over for decades. "Your new car is crazy, when did you decide to upgrade?" he asked. I stared in disbelief as my father patted his shoulder and replied, "Sometimes you need to treat yourself, son. Success has its privileges." There was no mention of the gift or my contribution. Sophia stopped me before I could process this blatant dismissal, pulling me into a sincere hug, long enough to convey her understanding. I heard about your promotion. That's amazing, Liz. Seriously revolutionary, she whispered, using my childhood nickname that no one else ever used anymore. Her sincerity was like a tranquilizer, but it contrasted sharply with my father's indifference, which only highlighted his indifference as the appetizers were passed around by hired staff. I watched my father lead a group of business associates toward the front entrance, gesturing enthusiastically through the large windows. I could see him showing off his Mercedes, opening the doors, pointing out its features, his face glowing with a pride I had never seen directed at me. "He's been doing that all morning," Sophia muttered as she appeared beside me, with a glass of wine I gratefully accepted. 3 separate tours for different groups of his cronies. Mom said you bought it for him. That's very generous, Liz. I sipped my wine while watching my father sit in the driver's seat, inviting one of his business associates to experience the luxury of the passenger seat. Generosity wasn't my motivation, I admitted softly only once. I wanted him to see me as a successful person worthy of attention. Deserved, right? Sophia gripped my arm. Not deserved, Liz. You have to understand. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Your father would never give you what you're looking for. Not because you don't deserve it, but because he can't. There's something broken inside him when it comes to you. Especially her words hit with surprising force, not because of the new information, but because hearing someone else acknowledge the dynamics I'd experienced my entire life made it suddenly feel painful and real, something my private thoughts had never possessed. The DNA test in my bag felt like it doubled the sealed envelope, a time bomb I wanted to detonate and simultaneously hoped I could hold back. The hours before dinner passed with the predictable rhythm of a Matthew family gathering, everyone moving into the formal living room with its uncomfortable antique furniture and over-the-top decor, chosen by my mother but approved by my father in the one domestic space where his opinion mattered. I positioned myself strategically at the window seat, slightly removed from the main circle of conversation, sipping my second glass of wine, and observing the familiar family dynamics with new clarity. My knowledge of our genetic differences created an almost anthropological distance. James naturally took center stage, recounting stories about his latest property acquisition, a struggling shopping complex he planned to convert into luxury condominiums. The initial investment seems risky to my partners, but I see potential where others don't, he explained as my father nodded in agreement from his leather chair. That's the Matthews instinct, my father interjected proudly. Seeing opportunity where others see failure. It's in the blood. The irony of his words didn't escape me. The weight of the envelope in my bag grew heavier with each claim of lineage. The conversation shifted toward me as James finished his self-praising monologue. Eliza, Richard told me you've been promoted at your firm, Uncle Robert commented with interest. Senior investment strategist, right? Impressive for your age. Before I could respond, my father cleared his throat. It's a good position to start with. The financial sector is volatile, always has been. Unlike tangible assets like property. He turned to James. Real assets withstand market fluctuations. They endure through generations. That familiar rejection stung, even though I'd anticipated it. The deliberate shift back to James and property. The implied inferiority of the career I'd chosen. In truth, I was starting to summon the professional voice I used in difficult client meetings. Our division generated a 30.8% profit in the last quarter, outperforming the market by 22 points during significant volatility. The risk assessment model I developed has been adopted company-wide. A stunned silence followed before my father responded with a dismissive shake of his head. Numbers on paper. When the next recession hits, we'll see how that holds up. He turned to his business partner, Henry, talking about property values. What do you think about the zoning changes in the Cambridge corridor? I asked permission to refresh my drink, meeting Sophia in the hallway as she returned from checking on her husband, who was watching the children in the backyard. Don't let him bother you, she whispered, holding my arm. I heard about your model from Michael's cousin who works in finance. He said it's revolutionary. The validation warmed me, though I realized how sad it was to still crave such approval. As I approached the bar in the dining room, I heard my father's voice coming from his nearby study, the door slightly ajar. The car. Yeah, it's a nice upgrade from the old model. When you work hard and build something from scratch like I did, you deserve this. The man's voice replied. It belonged to Walter Peterson, my father's longtime business rival and occasional ally. Richard, you old dog, always so humble. Your daughter Eliza mentioned she bought it for you when we were talking earlier. She mentioned something about her promotion. It seems like she's making a name for herself in New York. There was a moment of silence before my father answered, each word carefully chosen. Yes, fine. That girl is always hungry for attention. The truth is, her success comes from the opportunities one gave her. Private school, college connections, the basic understanding of business I instilled in all my children. That car is just her way of showing that she finally applied what I taught her. A casual dismissal of my accomplishments, a rewriting of my hard work, her hard work, as something that came from her influence, when she never gave her anything but criticism. It made me so angry I almost dropped the glass. The conversation continued, with my father explaining how he always pushed Eliza harder than the others because she needed extra discipline, portraying himself as the architect of her success, a role she actively rejects. I stepped back before my anger turned into a cold, clear rage in the main hallway. James stopped me, his expression unusual, serious. Eliza, he said, leading me to a quiet corner near my mother's favorite orchid display. My father mentioned that I had asked my mother strange questions about her college days. What were you really looking for? The directness of his question startled me. To be honest, after the DNA test, I casually asked my mother about her life before marriage, looking for clues about a possible relationship, but I thought my questions were subtle, just wanting to get to know her better. I answered carefully. Women of her generation didn't have many opportunities to build their own identities before marriage and having children. James looked at me with our father's analytical gaze. The family resemblance felt so clear, as if it were further proof of my exclusion. See, whatever you do, whatever you're trying to achieve with expensive gifts and probing questions, this family has a certain order, a harmony. Don't disrupt it with the crisis you've created. James' condescension was so perfect an imitation of my father's that I almost laughed. Harmony. Is that what you call this toxic hierarchy? A system where one person's achievements are celebrated while others are destroyed. I didn't create anything, James. I'm just finally seeing things clearly. He leaned closer, his voice low to avoid attention. Dad built everything we have. The Matthews name means something because of him. Your fancy job in New York, your trendy apartment, it all comes from the foundation he built. Show a little respect and gratitude before I can respond. Rachel's cousin approached, sensing the tension. Everything okay here, Auntie? Caroline was looking for the two of you. I thought dinner was about to be announced. James forced his public smile, his perfect sunny persona, back into place. Just chatting with my sister, business matters, nothing important, he said as he walked away. Rachel touched my arm gently. You know, Mom always said your father was biased, as if he was an Olympic athlete with unwavering determination. I think what you've achieved on your own is remarkable. His silent support almost destroyed the composition I worked so hard on. I've spent so many years convincing myself that the problem was in my perception, not reality. That having someone acknowledge that dynamic feels paradoxical, validating and devastating at the same time. The dinner bell rang, signaling Mom for everyone to start moving toward the formal dining room. I lingered behind, my fingers touching the envelope in my bag, considering options, consequences, scenarios. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, to withdraw from this charade of family unity, to protect myself from the inevitable pain it would cause, but another stronger part, perhaps more masochistic, refused to back down, determined to see this through to the end, to finally face a lifetime of rejection with physical proof of its root cause. I checked the envelope again, making sure the test results were still safely sealed inside, then straightened my shoulders and moved toward the dining room, stealing away for the show that was about to begin. The Matthews formal dining room always felt like the perfect metaphor for my family, with its grand mahogany table that could seat 20 people, yet somehow remained cold and impersonal. Ancestral portraits stared down judgmentally from the walls, and the elaborate table settings prioritized appearance over comfort, just like everything else in the world my father had meticulously built. Mom had outdone herself with the table setting, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier, fresh flowers arranged with precision, and place cards with perfect calligraphy assigning each guest to their predetermined position in the family hierarchy. I found my card as usual at the far end of the table, seated between Rachel, a cousin I'd met twice, and one of my father's younger business associates, safe from meaningful conversation. James and his family occupied the prime seats near my father at the head of the table, with Sophia and her husband acting as a buffer between the inner circle and the lesser relatives. My mother sat at the opposite end of the table, her position a perfect illustration of her role in the family. Technically equal, but separated by the expanse of the table, connected yet distant. The first course arrived with military precision, the waiters placing delicate appetizers of grilled scallops with microgreens in front of each guest simultaneously. Father, with a glass of red wine in hand, commands silence without speaking. Welcome, family and friends, to our annual reunion. He begins with practiced charm, his polished public persona shining through. Every year, I am reminded of how fortunate I am to have built not only a successful business but also a legacy embodied by my family. His gaze swept proudly toward James, who nodded in appreciation, then to Sophia, who smiled sweetly before glancing at me as if I were part of the wallpaper. A special welcome to the Peterson Group joining us this year, he continued, acknowledging his business associates. When surrounded by success, one naturally attracts more of the same. The toast continued with the father highlighting James' business expansion, Sophia's appointment to the community board, and ending with a sharp comment that family success comes from embracing proven paths rather than needlessly challenging traditions. His eyes finally lingered on me for a moment with undeniable meaning. As the dinner progressed through 5 luxurious courses, my father steered the conversation with subtle cues and direct questions, ensuring the topics remained within his realm of expertise. The real estate market, local politics where he held influence, and occasional sports talk that always highlighted James' athletic achievements from the past. When my mother tried to mention my promotion gently during a pause, my father smoothly shifted the conversation to the financial markets. "Henry, what's your take on the Fed's latest signals?" Effectively erasing my mother's effort without acknowledging it had ever happened. By the time the fish course arrived, the familiar pattern had fully emerged. My father periodically lobbed sharp questions my way, each designed to belittle rather than engage. "Eliza, your firm primarily handles domestic investments, correct? Isn't that limiting given the opportunities for global expansion? Or, I understand your promotion came after the Davidson account. What a fortunate coincidence that James could introduce you to William Davidson at last year's charity gala." Each comment was carefully crafted to frame my success as limited or dependent on family connections. I actively avoided using those words, maintaining the professional, friendly demeanor I had perfected in hostile boardrooms, refusing to show the emotional reactions my father seemed to be provoking. "Actually, Dad, our international division integrated my risk assessment model last quarter, and the Davidson account passed through the blind presentation competition without any introductions." My corrections were delivered with skilled gentleness, though I noticed Sophia's sympathetic smile at every exchange, the familiar family dance, painfully predictable. The main course arrived, a beef Wellington that was too elaborate, requiring full attention for several minutes, providing a brief respite from the dangerous conversation. My father took the opportunity to open an expensive bottle of wine that was out of reach, his consumption increasing throughout the meal, a concerning pattern that my mother followed with a worried gaze. James leaned in to whisper something in his father's ear, receiving an indifferent shake of the head in response. As coffee and dessert were served, his father's attention shifted back to me. The alcohol had weakened the minimal filters he usually maintained. "Eliza, Richard said you're still single," Mrs. Peterson commented with genuine interest. A young, beautiful, accomplished woman. Men in New York must feel intimidated. Before I could formulate a polite response about prioritizing career advancement, my father interjected. Eliza has always been focused on proving something rather than building something, he said, stirring his bourbon contemplatively. Some people pursue achievements to fill other voids. Family requires compromise, something the Matthews women understand better than she does. The harshness of his words landed with practiced precision, implying that my professional success was compensation for personal failure, not an achievement in its own right. My mother's sharp intake of breath was audible even from my distant table. Richard's position, she began with unusual firmness, but she continued speaking as if she hadn't heard. Perhaps if Eliza had shown more interest in the potential partners I'd introduced her to over the years instead of dismissing them as boring or conventional, she wouldn't be facing her 30s alone. Every word was chosen carefully for maximum impact. The public dissection of my personal choices was presented as a father's concern, not the hostile criticism it truly was. The familiar pressure built behind my eyes, the childhood urge to flee the table. Fighting against my adult resolve to maintain my dignity, I sipped my water slowly, noting with cold interest that my hands remained steady despite the emotional storm beneath them. I appreciate your concern for my happiness, Dad, I replied calmly, using every negotiation technique I had ever learned. But as you've often emphasized, Matthew's focus is on results, and my results speak for themselves. A tense silence enveloped the table. Relatives who had witnessed similar exchanges over the years scrutinized their dessert plates, while my father's business associates shifted uneasily, suddenly fascinated by the architectural details of the ceiling. The pressure in my chest grew with each heartbeat. The culmination of a lifetime of moments like this, public humiliation disguised as family concern, the careful erasure of my identity and achievements. The envelope in my bag seemed to pulse with potential energy, the nuclear option I had promised myself and Taylor never to use. As the waiter cleared the dessert plates, I realized with clarity that the path I was on was unsustainable. Continuing to seek approval from a man genetically programmed to deny it was a form of self-destruction I could no longer bear. As the coffee cups were refilled and brandy offered to end the complicated dinner, Dad pushed his chair back slightly, a signal understood by the entire family as preparation for one of his impromptu speeches. A tradition that had developed over the years in Matthew's gatherings. The anticipation-filled silence immediately enveloped the room, conversation halted mid-sentence, silverware placed carefully, all attention reflexively turning toward the patriarch. My father stood, holding Brandy's glass, his expression radiating the friendly authority he reserved for these public appearances. Before we head out to the garden for our annual family photo, he begins, his voice carrying the distinctive tone of someone accustomed to leading a room. I'd like to take a moment to express my pride in what the Matthews family continues to build together. He gestures broadly, including business associates as honorary members of the dynasty. A family is like a company, requiring vision, leadership, and participants who understand their role in creating collective success. His gaze swept across the table with skill, as if making eye contact with everyone, though he was actually connected to no one. As I looked around the table, I was reminded how lucky I am to have children who contribute to the family legacy in such a meaningful way. He turned to James, raising his glass slightly. James, your business acumen continues to impress, not just me but the entire Boston development community. The Riverside Project represents exactly the kind of bold and visionary approach that sets Matthews projects apart from others. You didn't just take the lessons I taught you, you've taken them to a higher level. James nodded with practiced humility, barely hiding his satisfaction. The golden child receiving the praise he deserved. His father then turned to Sophia, his expression growing warmer. Sophia, your grace in balancing family responsibilities with community leadership demonstrates extraordinary maturity. Your work on the Children's Hospital Board has brought true prestige to the Matthews name, reminding us all that true success includes giving back. Your mother and I couldn't be prouder of the family you've built and the values you represent." Sophia's smile was genuine, though slightly awkward under the spotlight, more comfortable facilitating others' recognition than receiving praise for herself. She braced herself for what was inevitably coming next. The deliberate omission of my name, the sharp silence where my name should have been, the praise technique of omission, would send a clear message to everyone without the need for explicit criticism. But what happened was worse. My father's gaze finally settled on me. A small change in his eyes betrayed the calculated nature of what was to follow. As I reflect on my children's achievements, he continued in a changed tone of voice, which may be misinterpreted by others as kindness rather than as the opening salvo of an attack. In fact, it signifies how differently the definition of success can be interpreted. He took a deliberate sip of brandy, the dramatic pause allowing the tension to rise. "I'm proud of all my children," he announced, raising his glass higher. For a moment, I felt a silly flicker of hope, but it was quickly extinguished by what followed. Except for the loser sitting at the table, his words landed harshly, followed by a stunned silence before hesitant laughter spread through the guests, most of whom assumed this was just a family joke, not an actual public humiliation. Blood boiled in my face, then dried completely, leaving a cold, numb feeling as every eye at the table stared at me with expressions of shame, pity, and strange curiosity. My father continued as if he had made a light joke about the weather. "Some people measure success by titles and salaries, by superficial achievements that look impressive on paper but lack substance and staying power. True success comes from continuing family traditions, from building on a foundation, not from constantly trying to prove one's individual worth at the expense of collective strength. The deliberate vagueness of some people doesn't fool anyone." The target of his comments was clear. My mother's face was pale, her fingers white around her handkerchief, while James looked smug and Sophia shy. Rachel's cousin reached across her husband to touch my arm in silent support, but I barely noticed the gesture. My awareness narrowed to a sharp focus on the man at the end of the table who had just confirmed what the DNA test had already revealed, that I was fundamentally separate, not a true part of this family in his eyes. For 20 seconds that felt like hours I froze, feeling the physical sensations of humiliation with clinical detachment. A burning face, a constricted throat, a racing heartbeat, the fight-or-flight response flooding my system with adrenaline. Throughout my life, similar moments flashed through my consciousness, a continuous slideshow of public corrections, subtle humiliations, achievements reframed as failures, each building on the previous one to create the final message that I was fundamentally not enough, not worthy of the name I carried. A name that genetic science had just confirmed wasn't mine. My father ended his speech with a cliché about family unity, which sounded hollow after the clear rejection. Something changed permanently within me. The last thread was severed between the desperate child seeking approval and the adult woman who suddenly saw the futility of that lifelong search. The weight of the envelope in my bag shifted from a burden to a liberation. Its contents were no longer a shameful secret, but the key to unlocking the prison of false hope I had inhabited my entire life. The room remained tense, waiting for my reaction, perhaps expecting tears or a hasty exit like in previous years, the predictable conclusion of a familiar family drama. However, what I felt was an odd calmness descending, a clarity of purpose crystallizing around a decision that might have been inevitable since the test results arrived. Without planning any action, I found myself standing, my movements so smooth and deliberate that they immediately drew attention. Conversations halted mid-sentence. All eyes turned to me with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern, especially from those who had witnessed the Matthews family's previous confrontations. My champagne glass remained on the table, deliberately untouched. It was a symbol of my refusal to give in to the emotions swirling within me, ranging from curiosity to concern, especially from those who had witnessed the Matthews family confrontations before. My champagne glass remained on the table, deliberately unraised. The symbolism of my refusal to toast was unmistakable. I smoothed my dress with steady hands, surprised by the absolute calm that replaced my previous anxiety, as if I had weathered a storm and entered an eye of peace. "Thank you, Father, for your enlightening speech," I began, my voice clear without effort, the professional tone I had perfected in boardrooms now useful in this unexpected moment. I've spent 32 years trying to earn approval that was never going to be given, measuring myself against mysterious standards that changed every time I got close to achieving them. Today, I finally understand why this room has fallen completely silent, the kind of heavy silence that precedes important moments. My mother's face is a mask of anxiety, while my father's expression is dark with the realization that this scenario isn't following the pattern he expected. For those taking notes, I continue with deliberate gentleness, hiding the magnitude of what is to come. I graduated with highest honors from Cornell, built a career without family connections, and recently became the youngest senior investment strategist in our firm's history. By objective measures, I'm far from the definition of a loser. I let my gaze sweep across the table, making brief eye contact with a few relatives who nodded in acknowledgement before refocusing on my father. But success in Richard Matthews' world has never been about objective achievements, has it? It's about obedience to his specific vision, about reflecting his glory back to him rather than creating your own light. I reached for my wallet with deliberate calm, aware that every movement was being watched closely. The rare sight of a dutiful middle child finally breaking the rules was too intriguing to ignore. "I bought you a car worth more than most people earn in a year," I said directly to my father, whose face had turned into the cold mask he wore when business negotiations didn't go his way. "Not because you needed it or even deserved it, but because I still held onto the childish hope that a grand gesture might finally bridge the mysterious gap that had existed between us my entire life." From my bag, I pulled out an envelope containing the results of a DNA test. The paper now seemed almost ordinary, given the weight of the information it contained. "For 3 decades, I've blamed myself for your inability to show the same love you showed James and Sophia. I've twisted myself into various shapes, trying to become anything that would finally make you accept me, without ever understanding that the problem wasn't my actions, but my DNA. The air around the table held its breath as the meaning of my words sank in. Her face faded from the last traces of color while James stood up with sudden alertness. I placed the envelope right in the middle of the table, my movements measured and deliberate. "This is for you, Dad. Happy Father's Day," I said calmly and definitively, slipping the appropriate irony into the title of father without waiting for a response. I turned and walked out of the dining room with a steady, calm gait, maintaining the dignity that had been stripped from me all night. The stunned silence lingered until I reached the entrance hallway, followed by an explosion of overlapping conversations that turned into indistinct noise. I continued walking out without hesitation. The cool night air touched my flushed skin. The path to the garage was illuminated by decorative lights, creating pools of light in the deepening darkness. The Mercedes was parked where my father had placed it for maximum visibility, its black paint gleaming, reflecting the light from the house, a symbol of everything I had tried to buy with money that should have been invested in myself. The decision was fully conscious, yet unavoidable. My hand found the spare key I kept in my bag. The remote unlock responded with a soft beep that felt too cheerful for the moment. I slid into the driver's seat. The leather interior still held the scent of a new car mixed with a faint trace of my father's perfume, an olfactory reminder of his brief ownership, which quickly faded through the windshield. I could see shadows appearing in the dining room window, silhouettes moving with energy. The family drama now fully erupted because of my departure and my confession. The car's engine hummed to life with expensive precision. The dashboard lit up with welcome lights as if nothing important was happening, as if this were just an ordinary journey from a definitive break with 32 years of emotional devotion. As I backed into the driveway, I saw the front door wide open, my father's figure framed in light, one hand holding what looked like an open envelope. His mouth open as if calling my name, but the sound was lost beneath the soft roar of the German-made engine. The symmetry hit me as I accelerated the luxury car he had once shown off to his colleagues, while my contributions were minimized. Now I was physically separated, just as he had tried to minimize my existence over 3 decades, both acts of erasure meeting in a perfect narrative balance. That discovery confirmed my intuitive actions as conscious decisions, the recovery of the gift parallel to the recovery of my self-worth. The burden of expectation lifted, and I drove away, leaving behind a trail that would become part of the past 3 decades. Both acts of erasure met in perfect narrative balance. That realization confirmed my intuitive actions as conscious decisions. The recovery of the gift parallels the restoration of my self-worth. I am free from the expectation of gratitude that never came. In the rearview mirror, Matthew's house recedes, growing smaller with every second, its grandeur fading with distance, just as the emotional ties to it weaken with every turn of the wheel taking me away. The lightness spreading through my chest is not exactly happiness, too complex and bittersweet for such a simple label. More accurately, it was the sensation of an unknown freedom, choices suddenly unbound by the gravitational pull of my father's approval, which had dictated the orbit of my life as far back as I could remember. The Mercedes responded with calm precision as I drove away from the neighborhood of my childhood. Each turn created more distance between the person I had been 30 minutes ago and whoever I was becoming now. I was almost at the toll booth when the first call came in on my phone. Sophia's name appeared on the dashboard screen, followed quickly by James's mother and a few cousins. Digital evidence of the chaos I'd left behind. I turned off the ringer but didn't turn off the phone completely. Part of me wanted to see the aftermath, even though ready to face it head-on. As I slipped onto the highway toward Boston instead of returning to New York, I allowed myself one glance at the rearview mirror just as a man I recognized as my father ran onto the road behind me. His usually calm face contorted into an expression I had never seen before, something beyond anger that entered a territory I couldn't identify. He was too far away for me to hear his voice, but I didn't need audio to recognize the scream coming from behind me. His usually calm face contorted into an expression I had never seen before, something beyond anger, entering a realm I couldn't identify. He was too far away for me to hear his voice, but I didn't need sound to recognize the scream from his body language alone. His hands were raised in a primal emotional gesture so powerful that for a moment he was unrecognizable as the controlled patriarch who had controlled his emotions for decades. That image was etched in my memory as I sped up the car, a visual representation of the seismic shift that had just occurred. The carefully constructed family narrative was shattered beyond repair by 3 pages of scientific data and 1 moment of absolute clarity. When I checked into my hotel in downtown Boston 30 minutes later, my phone displayed 17 missed calls and 29 text messages. It was the digital equivalent of the explosion I had triggered before leaving. I put the room key on the table, took off my high heels, and finally allowed myself to review the messages, starting with Sophia's text, which was initially confused. What just happened? What's in the envelope? Turned into concern. Liz, please call me. Everyone's panicking, to information. Dad's saying crazy things. Mom's locked herself in her room. James is threatening to take legal action over the car. My mother's voicemail started with a soft tone. Eliza, please call home when you can. Escalating to the 5th message where her voice broke with emotion. The test can't be right, there must be a mistake. Please come home so we can talk about this as a family. James limited himself to 2 messages, both threatening legal action if I didn't return Dad's belongings immediately and retract your disgusting accusations. The contrast between my siblings' responses wasn't surprising. Their reactions were perfectly in line with the roles they'd always played in our family dynamics. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, phone in hand. The physical and emotional distance from the reunion had allowed me to process the events with surprising clarity. The DNA test had confirmed what I had always intuitively known, that Richard Matthews was not my biological father, and that the emotional distance he had maintained throughout my life stemmed from knowledge he carried but never acknowledged. I had taken the test impulsively after discovering through a recreational genetic testing service that my father's genetic markers did not match. The initial shock gave way to an odd sense of explanation for a lifetime of feeling different within my own family. Now that the information is public, the carefully crafted family image has shattered in real time. Decades of pretense have crumbled under the weight of scientific fact. The most honest response came nearly 2 hours later, after I had showered and changed out of the clothes I'd brought in case the reunion became unbearable. The preparations now felt excessive. My phone rang with Sophia's number, and there was something inside me that needed at least one family member's voice to confirm that the earthquake I'd triggered was actually happening in the outside world, and not just in my own mind. "Liz." Sophia's voice was soft, suggesting she was calling from a private spot in the house still filled with extended family. "Are you okay? Where are you?" The genuine concern in her voice nearly shattered my forced calm. "I'm safe," I replied non-committally. "What's happening there?" She exhaled heavily. "Total chaos, destroyed after you left." Dad opened the envelope on the table in front of everyone, read it for about 30 seconds, then started screaming for Mom. He looked at her briefly and turned pale. They disappeared into Dad's office for maybe 10 minutes while everyone else sat in stunned silence. Then Dad came out angry looking for you, saw the car was gone, and completely lost it. I've never seen him like that. Liz, the clinical description of the event helped me keep my emotions in check, treating the situation almost like a business case study rather than my life falling apart. "Mom," I asked, scared but needing to know. "She locked herself in their room and wouldn't talk to anyone, not even James." The guests all left quickly after that, and you can imagine Dad had been on the phone in his office for the last hour, and James was talking about some kind of court order regarding the car, which, to be honest, seemed like the least important issue at the moment. He paused, lowering his voice. "Liz, is the test result true? Is it real?" The question contained no judgment, only a sincere desire to understand, so characteristic of Sophia's mediating nature. "Yes," I confirmed it simply. I did so after the genetic service flagged inconsistencies. "Richard Matthews isn't my biological father." Saying those words directly to a family member made it suddenly feel very real, something that had never been felt before despite knowing it personally. "Do you know who he is?" she asked softly. The test didn't identify him. It only confirmed the mismatch with the sample I provided from my father's hairbrush. I explained the technical details, easier to discuss than the emotional implications. But given the timing and my mother's reaction, I guessed it was someone from before she married my father. Sophia paused before asking a question that revealed her emotional intelligence, the kind that comes from understanding complex situations intuitively. "How long do you think he knew?" The question cut straight to the heart of everything. The betrayal wasn't the biological truth, but the decades of emotional punishment because of circumstances beyond my control. "Her entire life with me," I answered with a certainty that even surprised myself. "It explains everything, Sophia. Every criticism, every comparison, every impossible standard. She wasn't trying to make me better. She was punishing me for existing." The truth of this assessment was embedded between us, without needing to articulate the countless examples that supported it. "I have to go," Sophia said suddenly. "James is coming upstairs and I don't want him to know we're talking. Please send a message that you're safe wherever you are. And Liz, no matter what happens next, I love you just the same. This doesn't change anything between us." Her words were etched into my chest. That unexpected confession broke the ice I'd built since leaving home. After hanging up, I moved to the hotel window overlooking Boston Harbor. The city lights reflected off the dark water. The view was both familiar and foreign, like a reflection of myself in the glass. Somewhere in that city was the man who shaped my childhood through his deliberate absence of affection, and perhaps also the unknown man who carried my genetic material. The symmetry between these two fathers, one present but emotionally absent, the other completely unknown but biologically connected, created a strange sense of balance, as if the universe was finally providing an explanation for the constant imbalance I had felt throughout my life. At midnight, the last text message arrived from an unexpected source, my mother's personal number, rarely used for direct communication. "I never meant for you to find out this way. This wasn't an affair. There was someone before your father in college. When I found out I was pregnant, your father offered to marry me so you could have his name. Please believe me, he tried to love you like his own child. Some men can't separate their feelings from biology. I failed both of you by pretending that the truth didn't matter. Can we meet tomorrow, just the two of us?" There's so much we need to talk about. You deserve to know." The message confirmed what I had already felt, but added a layer of complexity I hadn't considered. I described my father as both a villain and a victim of his own limitations. My mother as both a deceiver and a young woman trapped in impossible choices in an era less tolerant than ours. I put the phone down on the nightstand without answering. Emotional exhaustion finally overcame the adrenaline that had carried me through the night. Tomorrow will require decisions about how much truth I want, how many connections I can save or are worth saving, and what form my life will take now that the central principle of my life, my father's approval, has been definitively removed. For tonight, I allowed myself to shut off my emotions, to sleep without dreams, unburdened by the questions that had accompanied me before today. The week after what my mind categorized as an epiphany, everything unfolded with a strange dual quality, moving with a painful slowness and a confusing speed. Each day brings new information that both clarifies and complicates my understanding of my place in the world. The morning after my dramatic departure, I met my mother at a small cafe far from family places. Her appearance surprised me with its vulnerability. The matriarchal Matthews mask was completely gone, replaced by a woman who looked older and more authentically human than I had ever seen her before. Her name was Thomas Keller. She began without preamble as our coffee arrived, her fingers trembling slightly around the porcelain cup. We had met in our junior year of high school at Wellesley. She was studying engineering at MIT, intelligent, kind-hearted, but according to my parents, completely unsuitable for a girl from my background. When they found out about our relationship, they forbade it immediately. 2 months later, I met your father at a charity event. He was the perfect match, everyone approved. The story unfolded like a classic movie. A young woman forced to leave a genuine relationship for social advancement, and she discovered she was pregnant after the relationship was ended. Richard Matthews proposed marriage, partly out of genuine feelings and partly out of a calculated decision about how Caroline's family connections would benefit his business ambitions. He promised to raise you as his own child. My mother explained, her eyes fixed on the middle ground where the past still lingered. I believed he truly intended to keep that promise. But since you were born, you have Thomas's eyes, his expression, the way he questions everything rather than just accepting what's told to you. Richard tried in his own way, but every time he looked at you, he saw the child of another man, the living proof of my existence before him. The revelations continued for 3 hours. Details of history I never imagined were revealed clearly, explaining the family dynamics that shaped my existence. My biological father never knew about me. He moved to California after graduating, started a successful engineering company, married, and had 3 children who are technically my step-siblings. My mother had been tracking his life from afar through alumni newsletters and social media in recent years, but never contacted him, honoring the promise made to Richard that the past would remain buried, that I would be a Matthews by name if not by blood. Over the 3rd cup of coffee, we arrived at the hardest question. Why didn't you ever protect me? You protected me. Yes. The pain accumulated over decades compressed into that single question. You saw how he treated you compared to James and Sophia. You witnessed him systematically destroy every achievement, every effort to earn his approval. How could you let that go on for 30 years? Her face was shattered with such raw sadness that for a moment it overpowered my anger. I failed to protect you, she admitted. There was no excuse offered every time I considered telling you the truth, revealing why he didn't give you what you deserved. At the time it felt wrong, the potential damage too great. Then time passed and the lies grew bigger, harder to fix. I convinced myself that you were strong, resilient, that you were building an independent life of your own choosing. I didn't realize until yesterday how much that lie was still driving you. The conversation ended without a neat resolution, just the beginning of a more honest relationship that will take years to build on a foundation of truth. The next day brought another major shift when I received an email from Thomas Keller, my biological father, responding to the message I sent after verifying his identity through public records. His response was cautious but friendly, expressing his shock at learning of my existence, asking for time to process this information, but also a genuine interest in connecting once he had come to terms with the fact that he had a daughter he never knew existed. "I see from your email signature that you work in finance in New York," he wrote in his initial response. "Ironically, I'll be in Manhattan next month for a conference. Maybe we could meet for coffee if you'd feel comfortable doing so." The simple acknowledgement of my professional identity without qualification or comparison felt like a balm for the still fresh emotional wounds. The neutral tone of his respect suggested the possibility of a connection untainted by Matthew's complex history. While this personal earthquake shook my understanding of family, the professional world kept spinning with pragmatic indifference to my existential crisis. My boss called midweek with questions about a client presentation. The routine work conversation provided a surprising comfort amid the personal chaos. "The Richardson account needs a direct explanation of your risk assessment model," he said. "They specifically requested you by name, Eliza. Your reputation is growing." This recognition of professional value independent of family connections reinforced what should have been clear from the start, that my worth exists regardless of the Matthews' name or their approval, rooted in abilities and character that are entirely my own. Richard made his first direct contact 6 days after the reunion through his lawyer, a cold formal letter demanding the return of the Mercedes and threatening legal action over defamatory statements made publicly about his father's status. The contrast between this response and Thomas's careful yet humane email crystallized everything I needed to know about the two men. Genetics suddenly felt far less relevant than character in determining the authenticity of a parent. I instructed my lawyer to arrange for the return of the vehicle while emphasizing that DNA evidence, by definition, did not prove James's paternity. His loyalty to his father was unsurprising given their biological connection and shared worldview. Sophia, however, called every day. Our relationship deepened through honest conversations about the family dynamics we had observed but never discussed openly before. "He has controlled the narrative of our entire lives," she observed during a late-night phone call, "making us compete for approval that was never fairly available. I benefited from that system, but I always saw how it hurt you. I regret not defending you more." Her admission helped heal wounds I didn't realize were still open. The validation of my experience from someone who witnessed it firsthand felt more powerful than any test result. 6 months after the revelation, the landscape of my life had shifted subtly and profoundly. Weekly therapy sessions helped unravel the complex web of conditional love and performance anxiety that had driven my achievements, allowing me to recognize true accomplishments separate from the desperate pursuit of approval. My relationship with my mother evolved into something more authentic. Her perfect facade was set aside for honest, sometimes painful conversations about choices, consequences, and the love that had always been there beneath the Matthews family theater. I met Thomas Keller for the first time at a quiet restaurant near Central Park. It was a strange experience to see my expressions and mannerisms reflected in a man I had never met, both unsettling and strangely reassuring. "You have my mother's analytical mind," he said over dessert, hours after a conversation that flowed easily. "But that sparkle when you talk about market patterns, that's clearly from my side." Our relationship developed cautiously, respecting each other's unusual backgrounds, not expecting an instant father-son closeness, but building a connection through shared intellectual interests and the discovery of genetic similarities that explained lifelong traits I had never seen reflected in the Matthews family. The final piece of this shifting mosaic fell into place on Thanksgiving when I received an invitation from Sophia to dinner at her home instead of the traditional gathering at our parents' house. Richard declined to attend when informed of my presence. His persistent refusal now evoked more pity than hurt. His limitations became clearer as I healed. "He can't change," Sophia explained as we prepared dessert together. "Her children playing in the next room with her husband. Not that he doesn't want to, but he truly can't. His identity is built on certainties that your existence challenges." That observation contained no judgment, only an acknowledgement of an unshakable reality we had both accepted. After dinner, my mother called. Her voice was stronger than I remembered from when I was a child. The forced perfection had been replaced by authentic engagement. "I'm proud of you, Eliza," she said simply, Not because of your job or your address or anything you've achieved, though those things are extraordinary. I'm proud of you, of your resilience, of your ability to build truth out of lies. I should have said that every day of your life. The words I'd sought from Richard for 3 decades were now spoken freely. Spoken by a parent who always loved me despite all my flaws, landing with healing power precisely because they came with no strings attached. As I ended the call, I realized the deepest truth of this 6-month journey. Family transcends genetics and legal definitions. It consists of those who see you clearly and love you for who you are, who respect your authentic self rather than demand you conform to a predefined role. The luxury car I bought as a desperate offer to a father figure who never truly accepted me has been reclaimed and sold, and the funds invested in my future are now being used for meaningful things, not wasted on meaningless approval. More importantly, I have reclaimed the emotional energy that was previously drained by an endless search for validation, and redirected it toward healthy relationships, not toxic ones. Toward work done out of passion, not to prove my worth, and toward building a life measured by internal satisfaction, not external validation. The journey from that defining family dinner to this new balance has not been linear or simple. Every day brings new challenges and occasional setbacks, but the direction remains consistent toward healing rather than further damage. Perhaps the most meaningful measure of growth doesn't come from big revelations, but from quiet Tuesday mornings when I wake up without immediately judging my worth, when achievements are celebrated for their intrinsic value rather than their potential to finally earn my Father's approval, when life is lived from a place of authenticity rather than forced despair. As this Thanksgiving night comes to an end, I realize that while the mystery of my father's origins has been solved, the more important discovery is that its importance diminishes with every step toward self-acceptance. The question of whose blood flows through my veins is far less important than whose values I choose to uphold, whose love I accept as genuine, and whose truth I claim as my own. Have you ever realized that your true family isn't always determined by blood? Sometimes the people who should love us unconditionally are the ones who hurt us the most. I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below about how you've created your own chosen family or stood up to those who didn't see your worth. If my story resonates with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more healing journeys, and share with someone who might need to be reminded that their value doesn't depend on others' validation. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes taking back your power means leaving behind those who never deserved it in the first place.